begin by recording this tutorial. And this is the, my name is not Mango, it's from Peter. So it's actually Manjo. So it's Manjo. Yeah, okay. So welcome to the tutorial for tonight. This is the second week's tutorial. And let's see. Again, as I said, I will see if I could catch up with the chat going on in the chat box. But as I said, I'm not really built for multitasking, I guess, just like all the other guys. So when I get the chance, I'm going to have a look at the chat box. But otherwise, I'm going to continue talking to you guys. So welcome again, and thanks for joining tonight's tutorial. So tonight, we will be digging deeper into the executive and the idea of a responsible government. And so for tonight, what we hope to do will be, at the end of the session, you should then be able to discuss and explain the concept of responsible government and provide an overview of Commonwealth executive powers. I'd also like to point out that I am likely to touch upon one of the questions in the midterm assessment, so that's probably a good thing. And although I won't be discussing the question itself, but there will be a concept which we will be discussing tonight that will be related to one of the midterm assessment questions. And hopefully that will be of some assistance to you. Just trying to figure out where the chat box is, just in case, you know. Okay, there we go. Okay, good. Now, before I continue, would there be anything you would like to discuss or ask before we go straight into the topic?
Yeah, just the answers to quiz 1, Manjo.
Oh, that's right. I will make it visible either tonight or tomorrow morning. Oh, the answers to quiz 1. Oh, that's right. They're actually meant to be visible today, weren't they? Okay. So, or was it this week? Hang on.
Sunday.
No. It has to be on Sunday.
He's after the answers, Manjo.
Right. So it's going to be on Monday of next
a man
week.
after my own heart.
That's right. So students are given until the end of this week or until Sunday to answer the first online quiz. So the answers can only be divulged on Monday morning. So that's what I'm going to do. I'll give the answers to the, I was actually thinking the question related to the Moodle discussion questions for week 1. So, but that one, I will make them visible by tomorrow. But as to the answer for the first online quiz, I will make that visible on Monday morning yet, because other students are still trying to answer that online quiz. Okay. Questions? So as far as, there was a question from Lisa. Was there only one question in the quiz? The answer is yes. There will only be one question each week for the online quiz.
Hi, Manjo. It's Kim here.
Kim.
How are you?
I'm very good.
I was terrified to actually answer the questions because I didn't know what I was expecting, to be honest, with the quiz. And when I looked at it, I think I've got it actually wrong. But it was an ambiguous question.
Was it?
But yeah, I thought it was. And
Okay.
I'm struggling with the concept that you've actually changed the whole portfolio of the subject.
Yeah.
And I'm just struggling to actually have rationality with some of the questions, particularly with the assignments. So I might just sit and wait as to when you're ready to, because I'm not sure whether we need to do a memorandum, like a letter of memorandum, or whether we need to actually do it as an essay.
Are we talking of the midterm assessment at this time, or are you talking of the online quiz still?
Well, I've actually moved on from that.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, I'm a little bit confused because it has changed, and when I look at the criteria, it just makes it a little bit confusing because there's so much information. It's information overload, to be honest, from my point of view.
Okay, which one is confusing, and where's the information overload? Is it coming from me, or is it the nature of the substance of the course itself?
I think I attempted this course July last year,
Yeah.
and the whole profile has changed. When I look at your information and what you're posting and our direction, just first, well, I guess the first assignments that we've got to do as a group, I'm sort of struggling to understand the concept of, there doesn't actually seem to be a question per se. It seems to be, it's a legal argument or a letter of memorandum to the client. So I'm a little bit confused on that side of it, how to answer that question. Then when we look at the individual assignment, I think what I did, I had to jump through the weeks to actually find exactly where your questioning was coming from. So I was just, I think it's just a lot of information overload at this stage, and I don't really feel like I've got a clear guidance of direction.
Okay. So let me try to address what you said. So in relation to the midterm assessments, which you had raised, indeed, if you go through the 4 questions, 2 of which are for the individual midterm assessment and 2 are for the group assessment, those questions pertain to some topics which will only be covered in weeks 4 and 5. And if you notice in the unit profile, it does indicate that the coverage for the midterm assessment will include up to the week 5 topic. And I would imagine that that's unavoidable. The other way of me doing it would have been to release the midterm assessment just a week before the deadline. So in that case, you would have had the chance to actually, we would have had the chance to cover the weeks 1 to 5 topics, but I wanted to give you more time to be able to go through the midterm assessment. So, and as I said, given the fact that the deadline isn't happening until about a month from now, by the time that the midterm assessment is actually due, we would actually have taken up all the week 5 topics, which would have been covered, or we should have been the basis or the subject of the midterm assessment. And I think it was also asked during the drop-in session on Monday as to why constitutional law seems, one of the students heard that constitutional law is actually taught as a year 2 subject in other universities. And that's in fact true. I think about 80% or 85% of universities in Australia actually schedule constitutional law as a year 2 subject. And to me, the reason for that is not so much because there seems to be a requirement that students become familiar with other legal concepts, perhaps from contracts or administrative law. I don't think that's the reason. The main reason is constitutional law as a subject has a lot of very complex topics. So for example, when you talk about basic constitutional law principles, whether some separation of powers or responsible government or constitutionalism or representative government, that is one set of very complex constitutional law principles, including the question about the powers of the executive, and which we'll touch upon shortly, the question about prerogatives and discretionary and residual powers. There's also the subject of the separation of powers among the 3 branches of government. Again, that is a very complex topic, particularly when you examine what the High Court in the Boilermakers case permits in terms of what certain powers may actually be either vested on the judiciary or on the other branches of government. That again is a very complex topic. Then there is the issue about the tension between the federal government and the states. And you will notice, I think that's being covered by about 5 chapters in the textbook. And then you have constitutional rights and freedoms. So there is a lot to be taken up in constitutional law. And I do know that in other universities, constitutional law is actually taken up across two terms. but we're doing it only in one term. So my answer is, in relation to your observation that there seems to be information overload, that is a very valid observation. And that is also what I felt when I initially, had to study constitutional law in order to become admitted as a lawyer in New Zealand and Australia. Because the constitutional law that I was exposed to when I was a lawyer in the Philippines is different from that in New Zealand and Australia. And it's really complex. So there is information overload, for sure. But the other point is, everyone is trying to become a lawyer. And the thing is, if you want to be a lawyer, you really need to just enjoy reading. There's just so much to read. But if you get into the habit of just enjoying reading, then after a while, you will get the hang of constitutional law. So I can give you the assurance, Kim, that as far as constitutional law is concerned, even if there seems to be information overload at this time, I can assure you that if you just continue to, have faith that everything will just at some point gel together, and that you will end up having a better understanding of the unit, that will in fact happen for as long as you continue to read the textbook. Honestly, you might have to read it 2 or 3 times. I mean, it took me that long for me to fully understand what constitutional law was about. Make sure you go through the study guides and go through the lecture podcasts, and preferably join the tutorials. But certainly I can give you the assurance that if you do those things, if you put in the effort, you will have a very good grasp of constitutional law. It won't happen now, but it will happen, in the next few weeks. So it's like, if you were to learn golf, if you were to learn tennis, if you were to learn how to do biking or scuba diving and so on, the first sessions, the first initial weeks are always going to be difficult. But you will notice that at some point, maybe 3 weeks or 4 weeks down the road, all of a sudden, things just make sense. And I can assure you that will happen as well. Because obviously, you're not going to be the only, you're not going to be the first student to be taking up constitutional law. And the valid observation that you gave just now, the very honest observation that you gave just now, is not unique. That has been expressed by many students. But I can give you the assurance that, so many of them have passed and done really well. So initially, it can be a struggle, but do your own reading, and I will do my part in trying to make certain subjects, certain topics which seem complex, become more simple. And after a while, you will notice that the information may be a lot, but it is information you love learning, because then you will see the relevance and its importance in day-to-day life. Okay.
Sorry, Matt. Thank you very much for that. I think just at this point in time, just to maybe if we could actually bring it back into a I guess what is required under the group assignment and the individual assignment. How are we supposed to write this for you? I haven't studied for 2 years, so I'm now a little bit out of the mindset, and I thank you very much for your comments, and I think that would probably help a lot of people just coming into
Sorry, Manjo, can I just add something of value here? Rather than take up our lecture time, if you like, I'm happy to host a Zoom session and just put it up there and have a bit of a chat to people. Obviously, I'm not a lecturer, but I've gone through this. I'm nearly finished now, and I've done everything you guys are asking about. So I'm happy to share my experience, but if you just want to do that.
Thank you. I was actually about to say the same. We have a drop-in session, though, on Mondays, and we can discuss this further. But so for now, I'd be happy to discuss it. So I'm just going to quickly, before we leave the topic, I'm just going to quickly make a statement. I actually responded to the topic or the issue that Kim raised just now about the structure of the answer. And my answer was, you just follow the IRAC and SIRAC format. There is no need to write as if you're addressing a letter to a client. Just go, and in fact, I gave an answer there. I gave an example of how the answer should be written. It's actually in one of the Moodle forum posts. But having said that already, I think, we're kind of running out of time, and there are some topics here which I'd like to discuss. So Kim, feel free to send me an email or put it in the forum post, and I'd be more than happy to respond to it. But for now, I'd like to jump into the topics. That's all right. Okay, so let me begin with question 1. What do you think are the implications of the idea of representative government on the power of judicial review? And this is actually, I think, related to the second question. To what extent do you think may the judiciary, an institution composed of appointed judges, review political decisions? So I'm just gonna, because we're kind of running out of time, what I'm gonna do is actually just to combine questions 1 and question 2. So feel free to put your answer in the chat box. Otherwise, it'll be very nice if somebody could just unmute himself or herself and try to answer these 2 questions. So question 1, what do you think are the implications of the idea of representative government on the power of judicial review? And secondly, to what extent do you think may the judiciary, an institution composed of appointed judges, review political decisions? For example, relating to tax rates, welfare benefits, and beneficiaries, and so on. Okay, so an answer from.
Okay, can I kick off here with my thoughts on part 1?
Yep.
Representative government means that the government is elected by the people, whereas the judiciary is not. The judiciary is appointed by the parliament. So to that extent, they are separate.
Okay.
However, I suppose there could come a time when the government wants to appoint judges which represent their own views. But eventually, the government is going to come up for re-election. And so the safety net is there, that they are separate. This is, again, separation of powers.
Okay. Thank you, John. Thank you. Before I make my comment, anyone else?
Yeah, Manjo, it's Gary. Oh, sorry, carry on.
So after Gary, we'll give the floor to who? Was it
Kathleen?
Kathleen. Okay, so we'll give Gary the floor first, and then we go to Kathleen. Yes, Gary.
Yeah, so I'd agree with what was previously said in terms of the representative government being elected by the people, but in terms of power on judicial review, it could be seen to limit judicial review as the concept of representative government embodies the fact that government is elected by the people and for the people. So my take on it is that the government therefore acts on the part of the electorate, and all laws passed by the government can be said to be that of the electorate. However, the judicial review of such laws and decisions by government may be seen to be an encroachment of the right of Parliament, and makes laws, and by extension of that, overriding the will of the people.
Okay. Thank you, Gary. How about Kathleen?
Yeah, I just started off with representative government as the notion that the government represents the people, thus the legislative and executive powers are exercised by elected representatives. However, in Australia, within the Westminster parliamentary system of government, the Prime Minister is chosen by the Parliament after the election of members of Parliament by the people. Therefore, accountability of the Prime Minister logically rests with the Parliament. In a judicial review, the administrative actions of a ministerial or public institution are reviewed. These reviews, however, are limited to decisions made under specified legislation. The separation of powers stipulates the judiciary maintain a separation from the powers of the legislature and the executive. This ensures the ability of an option of review of decisions made by the administration of the executive government and legislated by the legislature, which in effect is the Parliament, therefore including the Cabinet and Executive by a separate power of government, the judiciary. The ideal of a representative government is made difficult in Australia by the election process of choosing a party or parliamentary representative based on their political policies. These political policies are broad, and you may not agree with all policies presented by the party. However, are unable to vote for particular individual policies. Therefore, to be subjected to these policies and not in agreement with the outcome, an individual can seek a judicial review. If the government is representative and therefore elected by the people, the government is responsible for maintaining the constitutional ideal of a democratic nation.
Thank you. Thank you for those comments. Let me just give a very specific example. Okay, let's assume that the parliament decides that it needs to increase taxes because the budget is unable. The current budget that it has is unable to is insufficient to fund all the activities of government, including benefits and infrastructure projects and so on. So it has decided that, following the example of a lot of the Western European states where taxes are a bit confiscatory, let's assume that the government decides that the maximum tax rate henceforth will now be 90%, and the minimum tax rate will be 50%. So in other words, because that's what's happening in a lot of the Scandinavian countries, they're quite confiscatory. So just as an example, now knowing, again, being mindful of the fact that it is the parliament, that the parliament are representatives of the people. So what if there is that law that is passed where the tax rates now become confiscatory and, some may argue, become oppressive? And so therefore somebody decides to question the constitutionality of that law before the courts. What is going to be the likely response of the court to such an application, questioning the constitutionality of such a law on the ground that it is confiscatory and oppressive?
There has to be a matter before the court.
Okay, so there is a matter because somebody is saying that he is definitely affected by the new tax law. So imagine, somebody can say that on the basis of the new tax law, 70% of his income has been taken by the government, and for that reason, he doesn't even have enough money to pay for his rent or pay for food and so on. And that's why he has filed an action. So obviously that person has standing to question the constitutionality. The question is, what do you suppose will be the response of the courts to such? Yes.
Sorry, Mania, I was just going to ask, would this be similar to, I know that we don't have exactly the same system as America do, but would this be similar to the case of the Lovings and the black and white people being able to marry each other? So if there's a case before the court that questions the constitutionalism of a law, if it goes all the way to the High Court do in fact have the power to decide that it is no longer constitutional for that law to be instated, and that they can actually override that?
I don't want to address the American constitutional law at this point. I mean, I will after I answer the question that I posed, but I don't want to get into your question, Angelina, at this time because it can get confusing. But I will get back to your question as soon as we've answered the question that I propounded. Okay, so we're making the assumption here that somebody filed an action before a court. Could be the Federal Circuit Court, could be the Federal Court, questioning the constitutionality of a law that has been passed by Parliament on the ground that the new tax laws, the tax rates are very confiscatory and oppressive and is harming a specific person because, imagine 70% of your income being taken away by taxes. So the question, my question, I go back to my question, what do you suppose is the likely response of the courts? And I do notice that somebody was saying here that something about, okay. So from Gordon, representative government implies a separation of powers, that the government may not rule on the legality of its own legislation. I'm gonna have to get back to that, I got confused there. So what do you think?
I think it'd come down to the definition of oppressive as well.
Okay. I mean, what if we all agree that it is in fact oppressive? And let's even agree that the government itself, the parliament, agrees it is confiscatory, it is also oppressive. But it argues, the parliament is saying that they have the power to pass that legislation, being the representatives of the people, and that it is within their power according to the Constitution. What do you think?
Well, I think the obvious answer there is that the government are going to be kicked out at the next election if they are pursuing unpopular policies.
Okay. Okay, but I mean, let's assume that it's before the court. I saw somebody raising his hand earlier. Was that a different John? John Leon. Okay. Can I just go to John Leon's? I kind of saw him raising his hand, and then we'll go to Farah.
Yeah. I was... The court could consider the treaties that the Commonwealth has signed in terms of human rights, and consider whether an oppressive taxation regime breached the conventions that the government was a signatory to in terms of human rights.
Okay. Okay, John, I'm going to get back to that in a short while after I give my answer. Can I just give 2 more comments and then I'll respond to my own question? Because I don't want people to get too confused with a lot of discussions going on. I kind of saw, was it Farah who raised her hand earlier? And then we'll probably go to Nicholas. I saw Farah, and then we go to Nicholas. Farah?
Yes, I'm Andrew.
Farah, sorry.
I'm just commenting on a general view of the question that was posed. Pretty much the idea of the representative government is to introduce the policies.
Okay.
Yeah, and is to provide a commentary. But if they do decide that it is very oppressive, they cannot dismiss the commentary of the judiciary. It's pretty much coming back to the American system of checks and balances. It's like trying to balance it. I mean, like you said, the Constitution is a living document. So you know, I mean, that's where I'm going. But yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Maybe room for one more, Nicholas?
Yeah, I just had a general comment that my understanding was that any law that's created by Parliament actually has to be passed through the accent of the Governor-General before it's made law first. And the Governor-General, in his own right, may stand up for the people and make a mandate to take it to court and have it subjected before it even gets enacted.
Okay. So many concepts are intruding here. So in practice, it is by convention, the Governor-General actually just signs off on whatever the Parliament passes on to the Governor-General for his signature. So it is by convention. So in other words, there is a political custom where the Governor-General, as a rule, should sign off on what the Parliament has passed as a law. Because if it were for the Governor-General to refuse to sign a law, then it goes back to the question of who the representative of the people is. Because can you imagine the Governor-General just deciding what becomes law in Australia or not by himself? In comparison, and remember, the Governor-General is not even an elected official.
I'm not suggesting the Governor-General would just not sign it. I'm suggesting that the Governor-General has the option, if presented to, with a mandate from somebody, like you were saying, somebody mandates it, they can actually go to the Governor-General, and with the power of the Governor-General, then approach the court, and it gives it more weight in the court.
Okay, assuming that the Governor-General somehow does that, and it goes before the court. So the Governor-General says, okay, I believe that it is within the power of the Parliament to pass this law. So I'm just going to become an ambiguous curiae and come before the court and say that I actually disagree with this law. The question remains, what do you suppose will be the way that the court will resolve the question? Can I just answer my question now, if it's all right? Because I noticed it's 6:30. Is that all right? Okay. I noticed that there's somebody here who did give the correct answer. And who was that? Now, somebody was saying there, okay. Let's begin with the notion that the Parliament, the members of Parliament, and the Parliament in particular, actually represent the people. And the High Court recognizes that under the the principle of representative government, it is the Parliament which actually represents the people and have the mandate of the people, mainly because they are elected directly by the people under the Australian Commonwealth Constitution. So for this reason, the courts will often make a distinction as to whether or not the question posed before the court, where there is a matter, the courts will ask whether the question is actually a legal question or it is a political question. It becomes a potential legal question if it becomes a question of law. In other words, is there a law that has been violated by the Parliament passing this specific legislation? Now, there are possibly three constraints on the power of Parliament. The first constraint is on the basis of the Australian Commonwealth Constitution. So is it within Section 51, for example, of the Australian Commonwealth Constitution? And whether or not under that specific provision, the Australian Commonwealth Parliament actually has the power to pass a specific law. That's question one. The second question relates to the question of the separation of powers. So is there anything in the law which would suggest that the law would be breaching the separation of powers? That's the second question. Traditionally, the third question that will be asked is whether or not the law that has been passed by the Commonwealth Parliament, for example, breaches certain implied constitutional rights and freedoms. Now, somebody talked about the rule of law. The moment that the Parliament passes a law, there is a presumption of legality, because it is the Parliament which is passing the law. So it can be difficult to question the passage of that law or the argument that it violates the principle of legality or it violates the principle of the rule of law. So let me repeat. As far as the question of whether or not the law, whether or not the constitutionality of the law relates to a question of law, the High Court or the courts will ask, does it violate the Constitution? In particular, does the Commonwealth Parliament have the power to pass the specific legislation? Second question, does it breach, for example, the separation of powers? And thirdly, whether or not certain constitutional rights and freedoms are being breached or violated by the passage of the law. For example, the right to implied political communication. So those are the questions of law. It goes to the question of legality or constitutionality of the law. There is, however, a distinct question known as a political question. Now, whether or not, for example, whether or not it is fair, whether or not it is unreasonable, whether or not it is oppressive or confiscatory, these are political concepts. So if you have a tax passed by the Commonwealth Parliament where the tax rate is 90%, and obviously it is oppressive and confiscatory, that is not a legal question. That is a political question, because what would the basis be of the High Court or the court to say what is fair or unreasonable? There is no legal standard for that. And for that reason, because it is a political question, the courts, being appointing officials, will recognize that under the principle of representative government, they will defer to the Parliament as the representatives of the people to make decisions on the tax rates, even therefore if they are oppressive, even if they're confiscatory, for as long as it is within the power of the Commonwealth Parliament to pass that legislation, because the Commonwealth Parliament obviously has the power to tax the people under the Constitution, and obviously does not breach the notions of separation of powers, or there is no implied constitutional right or freedom that has been violated, the court will uphold the constitutionality of that law, because it is a political question. So the answer is the High Court is likely to refuse to entertain such a suit questioning the constitutionality of the law on the basis of the principle of representative government, because it is a political question and it is not for the courts to review decisions about national policy that has been decided on by the Commonwealth Parliament. Okay, was that clear? It's actually
so in other words, you're saying that in that case, the High Court would side with the government because it's within its rights to make the law, and we would all be paying 90%, like it or not.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Okay. It's not okay, but okay.
Wait, hang on.
You'd be paying your 90% until the next election.
It's just a theoretical issue, okay? We're discussing constitutional law here. This is not political science. We're just talking about the law. That would be the state of the law. As correctly pointed out by others, obviously, if the Commonwealth Parliament were to do that, they're unlikely to survive the next, they're not going to be able to survive for long because people are going to vote against them. Okay, so we're just dealing with the constitutional law concept here. So
even at the next election, if we voted them out, wouldn't it still be law? Wouldn't the new government then have to repeal that act before it was turned around?
That's right. Exactly. So chances are, if a majority of the people are against those kinds of tax rates, they're likely to vote into office a party that would promise to repeal that taxation law and come up with something that appears to be fair and reasonable. Okay, now let me just address that issue about the treaty, the issue about treaties. Firstly, in Australia, treaties by themselves do not have a higher position than the Constitution, because the Australian Commonwealth Constitution is the highest law of the land. It is the supreme law of the land. In fact, every single treaty, remember that a treaty is something that is signed, is an international instrument signed by the executive. It doesn't even have to be ratified by the parliament. Okay, as we will see later on, this is known as part of the executive power, the power to enter into treaties. And we're going to take that up shortly in relation to what are known as reserved powers or prerogative powers. So a treaty is an international instrument signed in behalf of the Australian government by the executive. It does not require the approval of the parliament. So in other words, a treaty is not even considered a law in Australia. It is not even considered binding on Australia because it is not law. It only becomes law under the incorporation principle if the Commonwealth Parliament passes a law incorporating the content of a treaty as part of Australian law. So in the absence of that incorporative enactment or statute passed by the Commonwealth Parliament, it just becomes potentially the Commonwealth can be subject to certain liabilities, but as far as the Australian constitutional system is concerned, it will not recognize a treaty entered into by the executive as part of the law of Australia until the contents of the treaty are incorporated into a statute. And for that reason, therefore, it would be difficult to make an argument that what if the Australian Commonwealth Parliament passes a law that is inconsistent with a treaty? So what if you have a situation where the law passed by the Australian Parliament is inconsistent or contradicts a treaty entered into by the executive? So now that can get confusing because I haven't studied this, okay? But let's assume we have a situation. If that were to happen, it will still be the Australian law passed by the Commonwealth Parliament that will become binding in Australia and not the treaty. Any potential liability that will befall Australia on the basis of the treaty will have to be something that will have to be taken up, for example, before the International Court of Justice. But a treaty signed by or entered into by the executive does not become part of Australian law until it becomes incorporated in a statute passed by the Commonwealth Parliament.
Manjay, can I add something here?
Yes, go ahead.
If people are interested in that, there was a case back in 1982, the Commonwealth versus Tasmania, where they blocked a decision to make like a big hydro system dam down in Tasmania, and it was blocked because of a treaty that was linked to another law that was enacted into Australia. So if you wanted to look in that, I can pull up that case and post it up here if anyone's interested in having a look at that.
Very good. Okay, thank you, Anthony. Please do that. That'll be nice. Okay, so I'd like to move on, unless there are any questions so far on what I said.
Manjo, can I just ask a
Manjo.
question? Manjo, sorry. With the two ways that the executive government can lose parliamentary support, I was just actually wondering, because one of the ways being that they reject a resolution declaring confidence in the government, when would the government put forth a resolution for them to do that? Like, as a government, why would you put forth such a resolution if there was a risk that it would be rejected?
Wait, are you talking of a bill that they're trying to push forward to become a law, or what resolution is this? Is this a resolution to dissolve a government? I'm not sure, Kathleen, what you meant by that.
So the two ways in which the executive government can lose parliamentary support, one of which is where the parliament refuses to pass a law appropriating the revenue, and the other one is where a resolution expressing a lack of confidence in the government or rejects a resolution declaring confidence in the government. And I was just not sure where the second one fits, where that second part of the second one fits in.
Okay, so it is crucial for the, we're talking here with the Prime Minister and the Cabinet. And the question is whether or not the executive can continue to stay in office. The only way for the executive continue to stay in office is that, one, it passes supply, so that it passes the law that sets out the national budget, for example. So in other words, if it is unable to pass supply, the law concerning the national budget, for example, then in that case, by convention, the Prime Minister and his cabinet will have to step down. So that's one, because there is no more budget that will permit the government to continue to operate. The second way that it is done is for the lower house or the parliament to pass a resolution saying that it no longer has the confidence in the Prime Minister and his cabinet, and by a majority, they're able to show a lack of confidence. So again, by convention, if this were to happen, then by convention, meaning it is not really a constitutional law principle in the sense that it is written in the Constitution, but it becomes a norm of constitutional law that where there is such a resolution, the Prime Minister and his cabinet will have to resign the cabinet. Was that what you meant, Kathleen?
Just in the, if I just read it directly, it might actually. It says in the tutorial, the paper that you put out, that the second is when the lower house, House of Representatives, passes a resolution expressing lack of confidence in the government or rejects a resolution declaring confidence in the government. So the part I'm not sure on is that second part.
That's right.
When would someone put up, or a government put up, a resolution declaring confidence in their own government that would risk a rejection of that confidence?
That's right. So it doesn't often happen, but sometimes what the government of the day does is to actually show that it continues to control the lower house. And the way that it does is able to establish that it has controlled the house is in fact to pass a resolution to show that a majority of the lower house actually continues to have the support of the lower house. So that's what it would do. So instead of passing a specific law, for example, it would then seek to pass a resolution, which means it will try to garner a majority vote in that resolution to show that a majority of the members of the House of Representatives still support the government in power. Now, if that is rejected, then it obviously means that the government lacks the support of the majority of the House of Representatives. But if that gets, so instead of being reactive and waiting, for example, for the opposition to issue a resolution, calling into question its confidence in the Prime Minister and his cabinet, the Prime Minister and his cabinet will be the first to initiate the passage of a resolution showing that they do have the confidence of the lower house. So that is risky, in the same way that it can be risky for the Prime Minister to say that he will schedule he will call an election just to be sure that he gets more people who will then vote into office. Members of the House of Representatives that will be more supportive of the legislative agenda of the ruling political party.
Manjo, is that probably one of the reasons that we've had so many PMs change over the last few years, because the actual government feels that it needs a new head for their push into the public sector to get more votes back?
Okay, so
the other comment I just wanted to make is a lot of people are referring to this exact issue happening with the Whitlam government. So if people want to go back and refer to that.
Nicholas, so there are three ways by which prime ministers are changed. One is that the government has actually fallen, in the sense that it fails to pass supply, or two, there is a resolution questioning, expressing a lack of confidence in the prime minister and his cabinet. So on those basis, the prime minister by convention has to resign. The second way that the prime minister, as pointed out by Nicholas, loses his position as prime minister is simply because somebody within the same political party seeks to wrest control of the as head of the political party. And so, for example, in the case of Tony Abbott, he lost the position of prime minister because there was a revolt within the political party, and you have Malcolm Turnbull. But in that case, there was no change in government. There was simply a change in the prime minister. So that is different. Now,
I realize it's different, but it's almost a way internally within the political party to say, listen, we need to get rid of this guy and put another guy in. Otherwise, there's a chance we're going to lose power altogether with the Australian public.
That's true. Now, the third way of doing it was really that issue about the Whitlam government. It wasn't really a question of passage of supply, but key legislation that the government of the day was trying to pass. And okay, I'm kind of losing time here. But on that basis, the Governor General Kerr at the time actually decided it was almost a constitutional impasse, because then he kind of decided to dismiss the Prime Minister from office, the Prime Minister at the time from office. I think it was Gough Whitlam, whom the Governor General Kerr dismissed. And in that case, it was quite unusual, because the dismissal had not really been on the basis of the government really losing supply or losing the confidence of the parliament. There was just kind of a stalemate in what was going on in the Commonwealth Parliament, and the Governor General intervened. So that could have been a serious constitutional law issue, because imagine the Governor General determining that he dismissed the Prime Minister and his cabinet, and that goes to the question of the issue of representative government. But at that time, before Governor General Kerr did that, he actually consulted with Chief Justice Mason, which again brought another constitutional law question, because justices of the High Court are not meant to entertain hypothetical questions. At that time, that was a hypothetical scenario, because there was no actual case. Okay, but we're going to discuss this, I think, next week. Okay, but I just wanted to address that. So by convention, we discussed that. I just want to go a bit, because we're running out of time. Let me just go to a discussion question. This isn't in Moodle, but this is the question I'd like to raise, okay? Because this relates to the power of the executive, and it's kind of related to one of the questions in the midterm assessment. So the power of Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull to send more Australian troops to Syria without parliamentary authority has been questioned, okay? So let's assume it's a hypothetical scenario. The question is, does the Prime Minister have the legal authority as the executive to do so? So can Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, for example, send more troops to Syria without authority of the Parliament? Okay, so the question one. Second question, How about his order to the Australian Navy without parliamentary authority, again, to stop boats carrying refugees from entering Australian borders? Would that be legal if there is no parliamentary authority?
I thought the Prime Minister could, as long as he had the backing of Parliament, the executive, that when it comes to war and things like that.
So my question is, where would the Prime Minister have the power? What is the source of the power of the Prime Minister? Where would it come from?
It comes from the Constitution, doesn't it?
The Constitution doesn't authorize the Prime Minister to send...
No, the executive. It gives the executive the right, though, doesn't it?
The Constitution is silent as to the power of the Prime Minister, for example, to enter into treaties or to decide on questions pertaining to immigration or pertaining to war. In fact, under the Constitution, under Section 61 of the Australian Commonwealth Constitution, that power lies with the Australian Parliament, not with the executive.
I think it comes from a can of Bluffamol, I think it's called, Anjo. And you just open it up and bluff everyone, and if no one questions it, you get away with it.
Okay. What do you think? So where is the power of the executive coming from? Or does that power really exist?
Manjo, would you have to declare war? Would there have to be declared war to be able to give that power, the authority?
Okay, so do you think, so that goes to that question, would the Prime Minister on his own, and his cabinet, for example, or the executive, as you call them, would the executive have the power to declare war without any law being passed by the Australian Parliament? That's the question. If you say yes, what is the source of power of the executive?
No, I don't think you would be able to, would you?
Actually, the answer is he could. The answer is yes. He has the power.
It comes down to prerogative powers, doesn't it, Manjo?
Very good. Anthony, if you could explain it to us.
I only read it today, so I might get this wrong, but I believe that in instances they had prerogative powers, like the Tampa, for example, where they stopped the Tampa from entering the country and sent it back to Malaysia. And there was a question of whether it was allowable, and the High Court said that they had the prerogative powers to be able to do that.
Very good. Very good. So the answer is, traditionally, if you look at the power of the executive, it's supposed to rest on the Constitution. And in fact, Section 51 provides that the executive power shall be exercised by the Governor General in behalf of the Queen. So there is recognition of executive power in the Australian Commonwealth Constitution. And Section 51 also provides that the power to execute and maintain the laws belongs to the executive. But there are certain powers which are not really discussed in the Constitution, such as the power to declare war, the power to enter into treaties, the power to determine rules about immigration, and so on. Now, the courts have recognized the idea that there are certain prerogative powers, certain discretionary powers, or certain executive reserve powers. So they're all the same. So whether they call prerogative powers, discretionary powers, or reserve powers. So the courts, the common law courts, have recognized that there are certain powers that inhere in the executive by virtue of being the executive. And this goes back to the time of the UK, when, if you will recall, the British monarch then was an absolute monarch. And the British monarch, prior, for example, to the 1600s, had the power to pass laws. So the law, whatever the king said was the law of the UK. Now, because of the Glorious Revolution, I think sometime around 1665, where King George abdicated in behalf of Queen Anne and King William, based on the Glorious Revolution, the king surrendered and recognized that the power to legislate only resided in the UK Parliament. So that you have a situation where, although the monarch traditionally was absolute and had the power to pass the laws, it was now recognized that the power to pass laws lay with the UK Parliament. However, notwithstanding this historical fact, the common law courts recognized that there were still certain reserve powers or prerogative powers that continued to lie with the British monarch. And that power, for example, included the power to go to war, the power to pardon prisoners, the power to enter into international agreements with other states at that time. So the common law courts have recognized that these are certain powers that continue to inhere and reside in the king or in the executive. And because the Australian Commonwealth, in the way that it has been developed, actually was based on the UK constitutional law government, it also is recognized in Australia that the executive has certain reserved or prerogative or discretionary powers, such as the power to declare war, such as the power to enter into treaties, such as the power to control immigration. And as correctly pointed out, that was also recognized by the High Court in the Tampa case. So there are executive powers that not only are based on the Constitution, therefore. So if you speak about the Constitution, that's under Section 51. The second aspect will be in relation to subordinate legislation. So the executive can have more powers if the Commonwealth Parliament passes legislation authorizing or enabling the executive to do certain things. So that's on the basis of laws passed by the Commonwealth Parliament. But the third source is the notion of prerogative powers or reserve powers or discretionary powers. Okay. Any questions so far? It's 6:58. Was that clear? And I think in relation to this particular question, that can have some relevance to one of the questions asked in the midterm assessment. Comments, questions? Yeah, so from Kathleen, that was the issue about the William of Orange, yes. Okay. Questions? We're good. So I think, there are no questions. We will call it a night. If you have any other things to clarify, please feel free to send me an email or preferably post it in Moodle and I'll respond to your questions. So with that, thank you very much for joining tonight's session. I hope that it was an enlightening session for you. And I look forward to seeing you again on Monday when we have another drop-in session from 6 to 6:30, as well as I hope to see you on Thursday next week at our regular tutorial. Good night, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, Manjo.